Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're located today. Firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Elliot Harper, and I'm a Senior Marketing Technology Architect at CloudKettle. I've been working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud for almost a decade now. I've written books on Marketing Cloud, and I'm very active in the user community. And over the past few months, I spent hundreds of hours learning AMP for Email framework and building many AMP emails in Salesforce Marketing Cloud, some of which I'll be sharing with you today, along with my learnings and unique insights in creating these new email experiences. Now, before we begin, I just want to explain this is a live webinar and we're really keen to answer your questions. But to help the session flow, I won't be pausing to accept questions during my presentation. Instead, you can post your questions to the Q&A panel in the Zoom Tray application, which John McGinley, one of our partners at CloudKettle, will review, and I'll answer them at the end of the session. Well, let's begin. In our session today, I'll be covering the following topics. I'll start by explaining what AMP for Email is, what it does, and how it works. Then I'll share some actual AMP emails that I've built. I'll also explain how to create AMP emails in Salesforce Marketing Cloud, before sharing some considerations and tips for building AMP emails. But firstly, what is AMP? Well, AMP is an open source HTML framework that was initially created by Google and is now maintained by the AMP open source project. The original objective of the framework was to enable web pages to load faster on mobile devices. AMP was originally an acronym for Accelerated Mobile Pages. Since its inception in 2015, the framework has diversified from optimizing the mobile web browsing experience into addressing other applications through subdividing the framework to include AMP websites, to enable websites to load quickly, AMP stories, for delivering news and information in a mobile-focused format, AMP ads, for delivering online advertisements quickly, and AMP email, or AMP for email, for adding dynamic content and interactivity to email messages. In this session, we'll be focusing on AMP for Email, which uses a subset of components from the core AMP framework that addresses the paradigms of traditional email development, while also enabling rapid development of highly dynamic and interactive email content. And Salesforce Marketing Cloud has recently joined the list of over 30 email service providers and platforms that support AMP for Email. But do we really need another email technology? And what's wrong with the way that emails currently work? Well, there are several issues with email today. Firstly, despite the ubiquity of email, the technology behind it has barely changed since its inception. While its format has gradually transitioned from plain text to HTML, there's still a significant lack of conformity of HTML and CSS support across email clients today. The net result is that email marketers are forced to compromise the layout and functionality of email content and implement table-based HTML layouts, which were really designed for displaying tabular data. Email development shouldn't be hard, but it actually is. It's a really fiddly process. The net result is that building emails requires a lot of patience, efforts, and hacks in order to display consistently across desktop, mobile, and web-based clients. Inconsistent CSS support across email clients requires considerable patience for email developers. So that the Can I Email project that we see here really begins to indicate the magnitude of this problem and displaying the varying support of CSS properties across popular email clients, in addition to HTML elements and attributes. In addition to the design challenges and limitations, email message content is based on time of send and can't be changed after the email's been sent, which can be problematic for volatile content like time-limited offers, fast-moving products, and customer data. Furthermore, email doesn't offer interactive capabilities. as any user action, like clicking on a button or a link, requires users to be directed away from their email to a web browser, which can be a very frustrating user experience. And it's these challenges that AMP for Email has set out to address. The benefits of AMP for emails can be broadly categorized into the following functional areas. Let's now discuss each of these capabilities in detail. Firstly, dynamic content. In regular HTML emails, content is defined at send time. So while there are techniques to retrieve images dynamically, where a server will programmatically return an image when it's requested, some email clients cache images, and images won't change each time the email is opened. Furthermore, this approach is only applicable to image-based content, as text-based content can't be changed after the email has been sent. As a result, there are many scenarios when content could already be out of date by the time it's eventually opened, including abandoned cart emails, where the recipient has since completed a purchase, time-sensitive promotions and offers, for example, a 24-hour flash sale, fast-moving retail products, where the product is out of stock when the email is opened, loyalty rewards, where a member's points balance or membership status changes based on recent activity, content from external services, including news, sports, and weather feeds, and one-time passwords or OTP-based emails, where password reset links expire after a very short period of time. AMP for Email breaks the paradigm of these outdated content scenarios through its ability to download content dynamically at time of email open. Specifically, it fetches JSON or JavaScript object notation data when the email is opened. JSON is a lightweight data interchange format that's structured, self-describing, and human-readable. In turn, AMP emails can retrieve and display both text and image content in real time, ensuring the content is always up to date, which can result in a highly relevant user experience. Next, interactive forms, which refers to the ability to fill in form fields and submit forms from within an email, has been supported by popular email clients for some time now. Gmail, iOS Mail, Apple Mail, and Yahoo Mail already support including HTML forms in email content, which collectively accounts for 80% of email client market share. Additionally, the interactive email feature in Salesforce Marketing Cloud enables you to build interactive forms easily. However, there are several shortcomings and limitations with this existing support. The first is that recipients are directed away from their email to a web page on form submission, which can be a frustrating user experience. Secondly, there's no method to validate form fields before submission. So if a value for a required field is not entered, or the value is in an incorrect format, like a phone number, then there's no ability to prompt the user to make a correction before they submit the form. Also, the form method attribute is largely restricted to GET instead of POST. Using the GET method, form fields and values are appended as parameters to the URL string, which introduces potential privacy concerns as the URL is stored in the web browser history, which would be an issue for public computers. AMP for Email addresses these shortcomings of email forms as it supports both GET and POST methods for form submissions, and there are a number of options for validating forms in AMP emails. AMP emails can either pass the response data returned from the server on form submission and display a custom message within the email, that is, for server-side validation, or there are comprehensive field validation options for displaying validation messages when the user attempts to submit the form or even as they type values in the fields. Additionally, support for asynchronous validation of form fields are also supported, where field values can be sent to a remote server as the recipient completes the form, which is useful for validating whether a username is taken. In fact, I'll show you an example of this type of validation in action during my demonstration today. Next, I want to explain the support for cascading style sheets, or CSS, in AMP emails. Inconsistent CSS support across email clients requires considerable patience for email developers, as we saw from the Can I Email project earlier. AMP for Email addresses these challenges by defining a comprehensive specification on supported CSS features, which, in addition to a list of over 220 CSS properties, also includes support for common pseudo classes. I'll just go back here. Which enable state-based styling of elements, for example, when a user hovers over an element, while also enabling styling based on the location of an element, for example, setting the background color of odd and even table rows. Furthermore, this extended CSS support also includes transition and transform properties, so you can animate elements on the page based on user action, and I'll show you just one example of this in my demonstration. In addition to an inclusive and standardized set of CSS features, AMP emails also allow HTML element classes to be set dynamically based on a user action, including when a link or button is clicked, when form field values are changed or a form option is selected or deselected, and on data change. That is, when external data is retrieved or data is set based on a user action, like the recipient clicks on a button or enters a value in a form field. In turn, this enables a rich, interactive user experience which opens a range of applications, which can be generally classified into the following use cases. Progressive forms, where subsequent form fields are only displayed after a field value is input or selected. Conditional formatting of content based on data. For example, change the color of a border on a form field if a required value is not entered or if it's not valid. You can dynamically replace images based on user selection, for example, changing an image based on a selected option, like a clothing color based on a chosen swatch. And this level of client-side interactivity has, until now, been only attainable on web pages using JavaScript. But the ability to dynamically bind classes to HTML elements enables email developers to build and embed feature-rich mini apps within AMP emails, as I'll demonstrate shortly. Let me now explain how email clients are able to display AMP emails. Now, the vast majority of emails sent today use the Multipurpose Internet Mail Extensions, or MIME standard, which, among other purposes, provides support for multiple parts of transferring both HTML and plain text formats in a single email. An AMP for email includes an additional AMP HTML MIME part within the multi-part alternative MIME tree, as we see on the right-hand side here. Generally speaking, email clients display the last part within this tree that they can understand. Email clients that support AMP emails will display the AMP content part, and for those who don't, will fall back to the HTML version, then the plain text version. AMP emails are supported by Gmail, Yahoo Mail, and Mail.ru for Russian subscribers. Sending to both service provider domains and custom domains are supported. For example, recipients don't need to have a gmail.com address. Additionally, AMP emails can only be displayed on supported user agents, which, in addition to mobile apps, include Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Opera web browsers. I'd now like to share a few examples that I've created which highlight the capabilities of this framework. Now, for this demonstration, I'm going to use the AMP Gmail Playground, which is one of several development environments available for you to go and build and test your emails. In this first example, we see part of an email that I used for a lottery client. Now, while I can't share details of the actual campaign, I can show you this main functionality. Here, the client wanted to create a lottery ticket selector, where customers can pick their winning numbers right from within the email. Additionally, the number of available numbers can change based on which game the subscriber is playing. So here we can see that we've got 49 options here, but this is totally variable. So when the email is opened, it will go and display the list of numbers based on the selected game. I can now go and choose my numbers within the email. So let me go and pick some here. And as I do so, you can see that they're added to the top row. And I can also change them. So maybe 8, I don't want 8, actually, I want 9. And once I've gone and selected 7, and only once I've selected 7, can I then submit the form. So you see continue here is enabled. And I'll be redirected by a secure link to a checkout page to complete my purchase. This link only works once. So if someone was to go and view that link in a web browser history, they can't go and see which numbers they selected. Optionally, I can also go and, if I can clear this, and load random numbers. And also I can change them too. So I'll just go and do that. I don't like 14, I like 15, for example. In this next example, I've recreated the popular Hangman game. And let me just zoom in a bit here. So when the email is opened, a random word is retrieved from a remote server. I'm just going to go and change my email to go and force this email to reload. And we can see actually a very long word here. And so I can now go and attempt to guess the letters in the word. So A, yeah, E, I, O, I have no idea what this is. So U, yes. And as you can see, the illustration above shows me how many lives I have left. So maybe B, I'm really guessing here. P, R, no, T, I have no idea. So I think some people do N, J. Is it jaundice? Maybe. No, it can't. Maybe D and C. Jaundice. Fantastic. I think that's probably the first time I've guessed that right. So I want to now share a couple of live campaigns. So this one here is a recent campaign that's actually sent last week. Let me just actually go and reload this here. And I'll actually show you what this email looks like in the recipient's inbox. So from this AMP for Email Playground, I can go and click send, and it will go and send me this email to my Gmail account. So we'll just go and open this here. I'll just reload this. And here it's just come in. So when I go and open this email, I've built this email to allow recipients to preview various lipstick shades within the email. So let's go and do that. So I can choose butterscotch, velvet, teas, and I actually like this. So if I can click add to bag, and it will go and add that item to my bag, and I can go and amend the quantity. So let me go and change this here. So you can see in addition to the shades changing, this text changes as well. Where's butterscotch? I like butterscotch. I'll go and add that to my bag too. And I'll have maybe 2 of those. So you can see as I'm making changes, I'm also performing math calculations directly inside my email to calculate the total. And when I click checkout, I'm directed straight to the e-commerce checkout page in Commerce Cloud, so I can go and complete my purchase. In this next example, I've built an interactive form and completely customized the look and form and feel of the form using the extended styling capabilities available in AMP emails. So I'm just going to go and here we can see is more of a mobile responsive layout. I'm just going to go and send this to myself and go back to this folder here. And there it is, it's just come in. So here we're sending out a review email for a kind of a post-purchase email where customers can review the product within the email. And so when I go and select an option here, you can see maybe this is kind of no, pretty great. Love it. I think we'll do love it. And here I'm actually using CSS to go and style these form options here. These are in fact buttons. But as you can see, as I'm making changes here, the label changes to reflect my selection. So maybe I'd say this is perfect. And maybe this runs slightly long. Comfortable is, yeah, I'd say it's perfect. And quality, I'm pretty happy with it. Let's go for perfect too. Now, I've also built in asynchronous field validation. In this instance, when a user completes the nickname field, I want to validate whether this nickname is taken. So let me just do this now. Simon99. And just go on to the next field here. When I change to a different field, the email makes a request to a remote server and actually makes an API request to Bazaarvoice. Bazaarvoice is a review platform and returns a message directly from the API. And so I'm taking that API message and displaying that within my email. So you can see that Simon99 nickname isn't available. So let's go and change this to Elliot75. And another option that's taken too. So let me Elliot88. There's one test I did earlier, I think. Oh gosh, let me go and type in anything. I think surely that's a long nickname. No one's got that. It's available. Gosh, that's good. Additionally, if I go and attempt to submit the review, you can see that two things are happening here. So firstly, I'm doing field validation to validate the required fields, whether they're empty, and also I'm detecting patterns. So in this review field here, you can see that it requires a minimum of 50 characters. So let me just go and insert some text here. Back to my email. Let's drop this down the bottom, out the way, and paste this in here. Also, you'll observe that I'm added an animation effect using CSS. So this placeholder field or field label here that appears in the input field, when I click on it, it moves up to the top and shrinks as well, which is just a kind of a nice professional touch. So I'll just say great product and go and submit my review. So when I go and submit the form, I'm displaying a confirmation message directly in the email and hiding all the other elements on the page, like the form. So how do you use AMP emails in Salesforce Marketing Cloud? Well, it's actually quite straightforward. So you typically go and build your email in a text editor and test it in a web browser. You can actually go and view AMP emails in Chrome, which is very useful, where you can use the browser inspector and the tools and have a look at the console for errors. Or you can use one of the AMP Playground environments. Once your email all functions correctly, you can then go and create a new email in Marketing Cloud. So let's go and do that. So here I have Marketing Cloud. I'm just going to go and create a new email message. And you can see that I've got two additional options here. I can create a template-based email with AMP and an HTML email with AMP. So I don't know, let's go and select this template option here. And I'll just go and select a template. And click select and give it a name. So AMP for email demo. Next, and we'll go and give our email a subject line. Now you'll see that in addition to the plain text view and our code view, we also have this AMP view here. And it's here where we can paste in our AMP code. So let me just go and grab that review code that I created earlier. Go back to my email, drop this out the way, back here and paste it in. It's okay, we'll ignore that for now. And when I go and preview the email, and we'll ignore that error, and ignore this one too, that's fine. But we can actually see the AMP email and also interact with it. So we can now go and preview our email, and we can do a test send and then use the regular send flow in Content Builder to send the email, or obviously, if the email's in Journey Builder, then we can send it from a journey. AMP emails are also supported for transactional sends too. Let's now discuss some more specifics about building AMP emails in Marketing Cloud. While Salesforce Marketing Cloud supports AMP for email, there's some considerations when creating AMP emails. Firstly, if you're retrieving content at open time or submitting form data from your email, then you'll need to create a publicly accessible endpoint that can be accessed from your email. And Cloud Pages is a very convenient method for this. You simply just create a JSON code resource page containing your server-side code. Now, for security reasons, any XML HTTP request or XHR requests to retrieve content or post form data requires cross-origin resource sharing or CORS HTTP headers to be configured on your Cloud Page. Now you can obtain the SSJS code to validate and set CORS headers from the amp.dev documentation website, and this will also be available on Salesforce help documentation. The AMP Mustache component in AMP emails is used to display open time-based content. Now, the Mustache syntax is actually identical to Guide template language, and therefore you'll need to escape OMM delimiters to force Mustache tags not to be interpreted at send time. And you can do so by including this following syntax pattern at the start of your AMP email code. Additionally, while the standard Marketing Cloud Open Tracking code can be included in AMP emails, the same tracking code is used for both HTML and AMP emails. As a result, you won't be able to identify who opened the AMP version of the email versus the HTML fallback version. As a solution, I would recommend implementing some server-side code to add a record to a data extension when the email is opened. You can learn more about this technique in my AMP for Email developer session next week, which I'll discuss at the end of this presentation. Finally, you can include AMP script in AMP emails to personalize content at send time. For example, if you're retrieving from or posting form data to a Cloud Page, a code resource page, then you can use the Cloud Pages URL AMP script function in your email. However, content block AMP script functions like content block by ID, content block by name, and content block by key cannot be used in AMP emails. While the benefits of AMP for email are obvious, organizations need to consider several factors when deciding whether to adopt AMP emails. Firstly, you need to understand what percentage of your email subscribers can actually open AMP emails. Counting gmail.com or yahoo.com addresses alone is not a good indicator, as subscribers may be viewing the emails in unsupported email clients. I would recommend using Litmus Email Analytics or a similar service to get insights into what email clients your subscribers use. If the majority of subscribers aren't able to view AMP emails, then it's probably not a good fit. Secondly, you need to consider the return on investment of email development. In addition to building AMP emails, you'll also need to create an HTML email as a fallback. As a result, AMP-enabled emails take at least twice the amount of time to build than regular HTML emails. So you need to be confident that you can recover the additional development cost through the campaign return on investment. Finally, AMP emails require a specialized skill set that is beyond most email developers. The framework requires experience in JavaScript and also working with server-side languages like SSJS to build endpoints for exchanging data. And even for developers who already have such experience, the AMP framework comes with a steep learning curve. I'd now like to share a few tips and best practices when creating and sending AMP emails. Firstly, iterative testing is a common user experience methodology that refers to making small, gradual changes or updates based on insights and testing them against some predefined baseline metrics. And I'd highly recommend that you apply iterative testing to AMP emails by sending to small control groups, particularly when you're including interactive functionality in your email, as you need to monitor how subscribers are engaging with your email. If they aren't interacting with it in the way that you would expect, then you might need to adapt or change your email. Which leads me on to my next point, which is to educate your audience. If subscribers are not engaging with your email, for example, they're not clicking on a save button to add a featured product to their wish list, then you might need to enhance the email with instructions or hints to guide them. Remember that this technology is still new for most email users, and they probably don't understand that they can interact with their email. Additionally, they might be wary in clicking a button like that lottery ticket selector I showed you, as they assume that when they do so, they'll be taken away from their email to a web page. And finally, your email designer needs to understand what AMP emails are and how to design for them. So, email designers are used to designing emails and supplying sliced artwork for layouts that never change. But as AMP emails can effectively behave like a web page, where the content and even layout can change in real time based on open time and user data actions, then your designer will need to design for this to provide an optimal user experience while also considering the different permutations based on open time data and user actions. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. I've explained the challenges of HTML email development and shown how AMP emails address these paradigms and enable developers with the power to create new email experiences, unlike anything we've seen before, which is set to change the course of email marketing. If you'd like to learn more about developing AMP emails, then I encourage you to register for the upcoming Trailblazer Community Group event, where I'll be presenting a deep dive session on AMP for email development. You can register at the following link. Also, I'm currently completing a new book titled AMP for Email Developers Guide, which I've authored to help developers quickly get started learning and using AMP for email. It will be available next quarter in print and online, so stay tuned for that. Well, thank you for attending the session today. We now have plenty of time for questions, and I see there are already tons of great questions that have been flooding in the Q&A panel. So I'm going to go and pass over to John for moderation.
Thank you very much, Elliot. We do have some great questions coming in. So I will see if I can get to the first one here for you. The first one is, can I take a regular HTML email and use it as an AMP email?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes and no. It's kind of not really. So while AMP emails are built using HTML, they do require some rework for AMP. So also, HTML emails are table-based. And while table-based layouts technically are supported in AMP emails, I would reserve their use for tabular-based content and recommend that you use divs and CSS classes, which gives you just so much more flexibility for accommodating mobile and desktop layouts. Additionally, the image or IMG tag is not supported in AMP emails, so you'll need to replace these with what's called the AMP IMG component, which will optimize resource loading based on the viewport position, system resources, connection bandwidth, and some other factors too.
Terrific, thank you. Another question, do AMP emails expire after a certain time?
Yeah, great question. So it all depends on the clients, but yes, indeed they can. So the client may stop displaying the AMP part of an email after a set period of time. For example, Gmail expires AMP content after 30 days. And in this case, the email will fall back to the HTML part.
Perfect, thank you. So
We have a number of questions that I would kind of group or classify into a certain area, and I'll kind of try to combine a few of them. So one of the questions that was asked a couple of times was, can you confirm that Outlook is currently not supported by AMP? And what happens, and follow-up is, what happens if an AMP email is an Outlook? I think you covered this, but the question was asked, so I'll get you to provide an answer.
Sure. So, funny enough, Outlook.com did initially support AMP emails. They had a developer preview which was enabled by default, but that's now kind of turned off. I think you can still kind of switch this on, but that's just for Outlook.com, so that they may still support this in the future. I think they're just looking, but how this pans out. But Outlook as a desktop client doesn't support AMP emails. So whether it's Outlook or Airmail or Thunderbird or kind of whatever email client you're using that doesn't support AMP emails, it will just automatically fall back to the HTML part in that MIME tree.
Perfect, thank you. So 2 questions that were asked, and more of we're hoping that you can confirm. Can you post the Can I Email Project link that you had in the presentation? A couple of folks have asked for that.
Sure. It's just caniemail.com.
Well, there you go. I think that's pretty easy. The other one was, is there a list of all platforms that are currently supporting AMP today? So you named 3, but is there a longer list that can be provided somewhere?
No, that's it. So you can go to amp.dev and go and select AMP email, and it's kind of clearly stated there. It's kind of featured on there. But yes, it's just Gmail, Yahoo Mail, and Mail.ru.
Excellent. And then a couple of folks have been having trouble finding or accessing AMP email. Is there a place where they can go? Is this GA now, or is it? Do we have an early release?
Yes, it was announced as part of the January release. It will be available on all accounts by March 1. So they're going to start rolling it out. You should start seeing it from, I believe their plan was to have for March 22. In the release notes, it says March 1, but you might expect to start seeing this enabled as early as later next week.
Fantastic.
So question from Jeremy. Companies generally spend a lot of money in having good template and content builder. How can they extract the HTML code and put it in an AMP tab and add AMP module?
And you can't really. I mean, the AMP code is it's just code. I mean, you can't go and templatize it in the same way that you can with a HTML email. However, I would recommend that perhaps you build out a library of boilerplate code with the various divs on the page, so you can go and remove kind of required elements. That's one approach to doing that.
Perfect. So similarly, I guess, is can I hide my AMP code to prevent recipients from copying it? And the follow-up question was, can someone else get access to that Hangman code?
Right. So first, I'll answer the first question. AMP emails are actually included as part of that message source. So if you were to go inspect the message, like if you were to view Show Original in Gmail, you'll actually go and see that AMP email code as it's interpreted client-side. And this is unlike AMP script, which is interpreted server-side at send time. So there's no way to hide or kind of obfuscate that. Someone can just go and lift your code. And in fact, I encourage you to go to companies who are using AMP emails, such as Booking.com and Pinterest. You can kind of learn a lot just from looking at their code. And in fact, even Google Documents or G Suite, you'll observe that if you use Gmail, when you're added or receive a comment for a Google document, you can go and respond to that comment directly from within the email. So that just uses AMP email. But yeah, there's no way to go and hide that. Regarding the Hangman code, of course, yeah, I'll be happy to share it with you. This is it's still a work in progress. I've got other features that I want to add, such as a restart game and reveal answer at the end. I'm going to go and be building this out, and I'll be sharing it on in my book, or at least the online version of the book. And I'll just go and give another shameless plug for this now. For email.dev. You won't be able to access this just yet, but I'll kind of maybe just give you the sneak preview of what you can expect let's just see whether it's going to come up for me. What's happening here? So here it is. So I've got 4 sections in my book. We've got a Learn, where you can go and learn the framework and benefits and that I actually covered today, and how it works, kind of really in detail. This is for really for developers and understanding the whole model. But also, if we just go back, and you see Create. So I have included Hangman as an example there. So yeah, that will be publicly available shortly.
Perfect, thank you. So one of the questions that came in was specifically related to Marketing Cloud and super messages. Is there any additional super message cost for AMP emails?
There's no charge for AMP emails. However, obviously Salesforce kind of reserved the right to change this, but that's the current direction.
So another question that came in from the group was, can the response from an AMP email be saved in Marketing Cloud?
So another question that came in from the group was, can the response from an AMP email be saved in Marketing Cloud as a data extension? If so, how can this be possible?
This is, what do I do this for? I'm trying to recall now. Oh yes, I remember the review, that Adidas review. So I'm just going to go and pull up my code here and show you this. So it's actually very simple. Let me go and just locate the code, and then I'll just quickly share my screen. Where is it? Push. I need to go and find it. Is this an example? Platform function. I'm looking at my code now, and now I can't find it. Must be. Oh, there we go. Yes, of course it is. So let me go and share the screen. And so this is my server-side code, which is a Cloud Page Code resource. This is all server-side JavaScript, and so this is actually in 3 parts. It starts with the checking and setting the cause headers. As I said, this is will be available as a template for you to kind of go and copy and paste. You don't have to write this yourself. But I'm doing where am I doing the update here? So when someone goes and updates the form for form submission, here we go. In addition to what I go in and do is to go and retrieve the fields from my form submission. So for kind of convenience, I've I think quite cleverly defined these fields as an array, and I'm simply going and iterating through that array and getting the query string parameter from that form submission for those 9 form fields, and then pushing that into an array, this values array here, and then using the upset data platform function. So where this is the name of my data extension, and this is my composite key, that is 2 primary keys, and then this is my fields array and my values array. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
So we have a question from our friend Yosef, who I think he's often attending these and always has some great questions. He's asking if you could speak to authenticating post requests on the server side. Does AMP authenticate the user in the inbox? For example, if an AMP email is forwarded to another inbox, can the second recipient act on behalf of the intended recipient.
Yeah, if emails are forwarded, it's just going to fall back to the HTML version. So I think forwarding will actually go and strip out that that AMP email part in the MIME tree. So no, that's not supported. You can't do that. Kind of a point to note on form submissions as well is that people have asked, can I go and check out? Can I make a purchase with my email? Or, how secure is this? And the answer is, technically you could, but I would discourage. Please don't get clients to. Customers to enter credit card details in an AMP email, while technically you could and kind of use an API to go and make a Stripe payment. You shouldn't do that. But what you could do as well is use a two-factor auth. So when they say go to checkout, you could go and send an SMS code using Mobile Connect, and they can enter that, say, 5-digit code within the email, and it can validate and do that checkout. So that's one way of authenticating who that user is when they submit the form.
Excellent. So a follow-up question on that, can you trigger an abandoned cart or an abandonment form journey if the user doesn't check out or submit the form?
Sure, yeah, of course. So what you can do is obviously when they open the email, as I said, you'd actually use the AMP list component to go and retrieve content. It could just be kind of an empty array of content. You don't actually have to include anything, but we can use that XHR request to go and insert a record into a data extension to see that they've opened the email. And subsequently, when they go and click on a user action or click on a form field, then we can go and capture that in real time, as I did with that, asynchronously, and going and checking whether a username exists. That definitely can be done. And then as so you can go and create these progressive forms, and obviously if they haven't responded to the call to action and completed the checkout, then you can then use this data to identify subscribers who haven't checked out and push them into a journey, from an automation.
Well, thank you. So Mark was wondering, are the JS libraries for AMP emails slow like AMP web pages?
No. So AMP web pages, they shouldn't be slow at all. These libraries, firstly, you only initialize the libraries, and allow me to show you. I think that will be better just to provide some kind of context. I'm just going to go and share my screen again, and this one here, share. So let's go and have a look at the Adidas email here. So you can see I'm actually loading two libraries here. So they're highly optimized, kind of extremely quick to load. While you can't actually write JavaScript, your own actually custom scripts in an email, the framework actually uses JavaScript to go and load these libraries, but from my experience, they're extremely fast. I'm not quite sure which delay you're referring to. You may observe that AMP images, that is, you don't actually need to include the library. It's included as part of this core library here. There's a slight delay of, say, 300 milliseconds when opening those AMP images, but that's intentional, as I explained before. It's all based on kind of the viewport and bandwidth and other factors too. But you shouldn't experience any performance issues.
Excellent. So one of the challenges with designing emails is making an email display uniformly across browsers. Do you think that AMP will solve for this by dictating a standard for clients to follow?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I found this in building out the many emails that I built. I just showed you a handful. I think I indicated I've cumulatively spent hundreds of hours working in AMP for email, with AMP for email over the past few months. CS support is actually very consistent across Gmail and Yahoo Mail and user agents too. This doesn't, however, negate the requirement to go and test your emails. And I kind of stumbled on one issue where I had actually gone and had I wanted a link to behave like a button. So I created a link, and it all worked fine. This is for that lipstick email, actually. It was all kind of perfect. Like when you went and clicked on a swatch, actually, that was a link. It worked fine in Gmail, but in Firefox, it didn't. It has to be kind of, well, it worked weirdly enough intermittently as well, so it had to be a button. So there were a couple of, that's kind of clearly a bug. I mean, there are a few nuances, but generally speaking, all of the 220 supported CS properties that you see on amp.email.dev for AMP for email should be supported in all those user agents.
So following on that with CSS support for AMP, does it, or do you know if it is going to support HTML for like video elements as an example?
I think it does. So let me just, I actually haven't used it. So I'm just going to go to amp.dev and show you where to go and look for that answer. I'm, again, pretty sure. I'll just go and share my screen again. And this time go and share here. So here we are on the amp.dev site. And if you go to documentation components, you'll see all of the components available within the core AMP framework. Make sure you filter to email, and here you can see 16 of them. So there's, video isn't available kind of at this time. So there's a video here. That's AMP video, there we go. But yeah, it's not available for email at the moment.
All right. So there was another question specifically around Marketing Cloud. Can you show a little bit more about the template with AMP feature in Marketing Cloud? Is that something you can show an example of?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, that there is no template. It's, think of it as just in a HTML email, you paste your HTML code. You do exactly the same in an AMP email. I'll go and share my screen again, and let's go for my desktop. Dock this to the bottom. So let's go back to my my email. So whether it's a template-based email or that is whether it's template plus AMP or HTML plus AMP, we go back here. You just go and to this AMP part and paste your code in here, just as you would go and paste the plain text version in here. You paste your AMP code in this. There's no kind of a template approach, and you can't kind of preview AMP at this time. I know that I don't believe it's on the roadmap yet. It's certainly one of the things that they're interested in exploring is to be able to go and do this more declaratively. But it's very challenging actually to go and accommodate for every single use case. But I would like to see that Salesforce create maybe a library of AMP email, I guess, boilerplate templates that you can copy and paste and adapt to quickly get started. If you are looking at kind of quickly getting started, there are some templates that you can run with. Actually, if we go back to amp.dev, you will see that if you go to under AMP email, if you go AMP email down here, and I think community examples, there are some examples for emails as well. Anyway, it's all a bit of a, let me go and switch to email, toggle sidebar, featured examples. So so there are lots of examples in here. For example, AMP accordion effect here. So you can go and copy and paste that. So these aren't obviously specific to Salesforce Marketing Cloud. They can be used in any platform that support AMP for email.
Terrific. So I think we have time for maybe one more question here. And really that's around reporting. How do I report on email engagement, specifically user actions within an email?
Yeah, so as I explained, there's you can't go and just use the default open tracking because it's using this kind of common tracking pixel. In theory, actually, you might be able to do it by IP address because all content is proxied by Gmail or Yahoo servers. But for reporting on interactivity, what you'd have to do is to effectively post a form every time a user interacts with your content. And this is using an actions and events. I'm actually going to be guiding you through this in the developer webinar next week, so stay tuned for that. But there's for example, an on tap event or on change event. So when someone clicks on a button or changes a value in the field, then you can automatically submit a form in the background then obviously go and capture that form data and store it in a data extension and use it for reporting. So at the moment, yeah, you have to go and implement this yourself in a custom fashion, store it in a data extension.
Excellent. Well, I think that is about it for questions, and we are just at time now. Again, thank you, Elliot. Tons of great information there. I'm going to give you the last word. You did mention you've got an upcoming event next week as well. The book's coming out. Tons and tons of things on the go. Very exciting to see where email's going. So, my friend, the last word to you, and then we will call it a day.
Yeah, well, thanks for everyone for joining. A copy of this recording will be sent out after in the next day or so. And I encourage you to start exploring this really powerful framework. You find that it's actually kind of quickly to get started walking and using it, using some of the examples available on the ant.dev website. So go and check it out.